Wanted to ask you a question today. How did you feel when you saw your first ever fantasy figure? I always think when you're looking at goblins, you need to see a few. So there we've got 4 little lesser goblins, little drowned ones, scuttling along. Don't they look great? I just love them. I could look at those fellas forever and ever. First goblins I ever bought, best goblins I ever bought. It's easier for people in my generation to answer that than it is for a younger generation, because younger generations, you've been used to walking past games workshops and seeing figures and having friends or older brothers with war games figures. It's the norm. When I was a kid, rationing was still on just after the war for some things. And getting sweets, there was stuff you couldn't get. When it did arrive, it was magic. Even things that were horrible, pomegranates. We also got around with half a pomegranate and a pin. I don't know why you have to eat the seeds with a pin. Strikes me as dangerous for an 8-year-old. There's a pomegranate, well, half a pomegranate, and there's a pin. Got to poke that in there and then stick that in your mouth. I'd never even imagined there could be such a thing as a fantasy figure. To me, as a wargaming was 30, your dream. What's your dream? Your dream is 30 identical figures from the Napoleonic Wars, or whatever, and an officer, and a drummer, and a lad holding a flag. We didn't know what to make of it. We couldn't use them in the wargaming. People my age, teenagers, were reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, so we knew what to make of them. We knew exactly what to make of them, and we wanted them. It wasn't that they were expensive, it was that they were rare. So to get them, you had to order them from a War Games magazine, and if you wanted some of the American things, you had to order from a specialist importer. And you had to write down what you wanted, sometimes even a letter with a pen. And you had to put a stamp on it and post it. And you had to put postage and packing in for return so you didn't get anything back. Then you'd start to get catalogues. There were no shops that sold figures. In 1972, 73, there wasn't a shop in Doncaster that sold fantasy figures. We used to get together, a group of us. We'd get a catalogue between us. When it arrived, whoever had sent for it would bring it to school and we'd all pore over it when it was our turn, making copious notes and dreaming at the photos, looking at dwarf with mattock. And things stopped in our heads when miniature figurines moved away from Lord of the Rings and started to do sword and sorcery. They had some monsters and I never got one, and I wish I had, and it was called Mouth on Legs, and it was a big pair of lips and bendy legs with knobbly knees, and massive great pit boots on, big hobnailed army boots, no arms, or a mouth on legs. Oh, I wish I'd got a mouth on legs. And we'd all put our money together and we'd order what we wanted, and they'd go to the same person's house and then they'd bring them into school, and when we sit before assembly and we'd hand all the bags out and, I want one of them. Like when you get takeaway today, who wanted prawn crackers? Well, prawn crackers. And it was exciting, and it was our thing. Grown-ups weren't doing it. Other youngsters, people younger than us, weren't doing it. Everyone in my school that was doing it through that catalogue. We were a very unique secret society, and we like that. It's exciting when you're young. By the mid-70s, I would say 74, 75, War Games clubs were putting shows on where fantasy figures were arriving. People were selling them. And people were selling different sorts of medieval figures. So Bill Lamming in Hull was making really interesting medieval civilians, nuns, and ladies with wimples and so on, all of which made nice additional scenery to your fantasy game. As fantasy became more important, obviously, shops then start to add fantasy figures. So you'd go maybe into the stamp corner and there'd be all the Napoleonic soldiers everywhere because that's what they lived by. But then there'd be a rack, one of them swingy round racks, and it'd have just random occasional fantasy things in. So it starts to become more prevalent. I used to take my war games group, we used to meet sort of every Friday, and then once a year in Sheffield, there's a big fair, the Triples. It used to be at the Crucible where they play the snooker, and we used to get a minibus, and we used to all go on a Saturday, all the kids in the group, about 20 of them, and me, and we used to go to the war games fair, and we started to see fantasy games. And some were silly fantasy games. I remember one we played where it was a participation game, and it was a sort of a map of a jungle, but it's not like Snakes and Ladders. It was just a trail through a jungle with numbers on each inch. But then the jungle either side was palm trees, but if you threw a 1, a dinosaur appeared. And the dinosaur appeared on your track behind you, and you threw a D6 and moved that number. But if the dinosaur appeared, it was throwing a D10, so it could come faster than you. But as you ran along, you might land on a square that was coloured in, that was treasure. But if you landed on a treasure, you had a misturn to dig it up, but the dinosaur was chasing you. So there were silly things like that were happening. Grenadier. Nowadays, I call these great goblins. Perhaps maybe Tanga. They're brutal. These are the goblins in my world that you really don't want to come across. And I have a lot of these chaps, and they are not very nice. That's where I first saw the Grenadier Barbarian, like Conan, but riding on a saber-toothed tiger. I could never paint that saber-toothed tiger right. He always looked like he had varicose veins. In the end, I just ended up painting him like a lioness. I didn't bother with stripes. It's a fantasy world, who knows? I could have painted him blue, couldn't I, if I'd thought about it? It's a fantasy world, leave me alone. But I got right into that, really into that. But again, you had to go and find them, and we're looking now into probably up to 83. But more and more of the model shops, toy shops, model railway shops started to sell random figures. And then, round about 84, Games Workshop officially opened in Burnley. And after that, it all snowballed, really. So this is my group. I've got probably 12 of these altogether. I absolutely love these lads. I really enjoy these goblins. I've never got into the fancy Games Workshop ones, and the ones that started to look a bit silly, the snotlings and things. This is my idea of a goblin. And then again, at shows, we're getting more and more companies making specialist things, like Vanguard, who made a lot of the figures I really like. Tell me, what was the first figures you saw? Yeah, not the first figures you bought. First figures you saw. And how did it make you feel? Where were you? Why were you there? Why were you where you were supposed to be? Tragic.